Well, today we're going to take a break from Colossians. If you've been with us, we've been studying the book of Colossians for, I think, 5 weeks or 4 weeks, and we're going to have 5 or 4 more weeks. But for 3 weeks, we're going to take a little break, and we're going to peek into Matthew 25. You can go ahead and open your Bibles to Matthew 25, though we're a couple minutes out from this sermon. We're talking about, it's a time in the life of our church where we talk about how can we as a church be obedient to what we like to talk about as the great commandment of the Lord, to love our neighbor, to be a blessing to our neighbors, to be a blessing to those around us. And we kind of capture this in what is called our Bless the City emphasis. We want through our lives the goodness and the fullness and the mercy and the justice of Jesus to be known in this place that he has called us to live, Atlanta, Georgia. And because we want that, and we want that to continue to spread, I also want to give you a little bit of an update. 2 weeks ago in our members meeting, we voted, and if you haven't heard this, but we had a church kind of reach out to us and offer their property and assets for us as a church to begin a second site of Christ Covenant in Sandy Springs. It's First Baptist Sandy Springs, and we, the congregation, overwhelmingly voted to receive that. And so many of you have been reaching out to me and saying, okay, so when are we starting there? I actually preached for them last week, and so people thought, is it already started? So, no, it hasn't started. It's gonna be a process, and so we probably won't kind of begin that for about another year maybe. So there's a lot of work to do kind of for them and for us, but we are excited about that opportunity, but just wanted to kind of give you that update. And things will start picking up in the new year. And so just kind of hold on for now, but in 2024, more activity will take place. But today, we have this amazing opportunity. And what we do during Bless the City, it's not that this is the time of year that we bless the city. It's like, for 3 weeks in October, we do some nice things for folks. It's the time where we highlight that, or the time we invite you into that. And there's other times throughout the city. So to learn more about this, we have this really helpful video that Kevin and his team just did an amazing job preparing. And from Billy, who's our missions pastor, we can learn more just about the vision and the opportunities that are ahead of us as a church. So if you'll turn your attention to the screen at this time.
The biblical story of redemption begins in a garden and ends in a city. In Revelation 21, we're given this promise of what is coming for the people of God. This is when Christ returns to make all things right, when our hopes in him are fully realized and the garden realities of Eden are restored. People from all the nations will gather to worship and enjoy him forever in a city, the New Jerusalem. As Christians, we long for that city. We aren't there yet. For now, we're here in our city, where injustice and sorrow and suffering are still present realities. And it can be so easy for us to focus in on the tragedies of the city and begin to feel hopeless. But God wants us to see that there is so much good to behold in our city. Just look around us. Atlanta is a harbor of God's common grace, a hub of resources and innovation and cultural influence. And this is where God has placed us as we wait for the city to come. And he's called us to be faithful in the midst of it. As a church committed to missions, we have the opportunity to display and proclaim the gospel in cities all over the world. But here in our own city, we're called to be distinct and present in our own neighborhoods, in our workplaces, in our daily lives. And God in his providence has situated Christ Covenant in the heart of Atlanta. And so we want to be a church that gathers faithfully so that we can scatter well. And he's placed each and every one of us, each and every one of you here. And he's called us to display the gospel to the peoples of our city. So as a church body, we have this opportunity to imagine what this might look like practically. Bless the City is Christ Covenant's scattering ministry to the city of Atlanta. We want to be a people who do good works, pursue justice, and love our neighbors well. Our aim is to faithfully equip and mobilize our members to engage our city through meaningful partnerships with organizations, ministries, and churches in our communities. And we do this in 4 strategic focus areas. Community flourishing. As we've already said, God has placed our church here in Atlanta to display His mercy and justice to vulnerable communities right here among us. We want to see these communities flourish, both physically and spiritually. Family restoration. We desire to give particular care to pregnant mothers and vulnerable children in need. Through our partnerships, we equip our members to engage in foster care and adoption and come alongside women who find themselves with difficult, unplanned pregnancies. Fighting trafficking. Atlanta is among the top 5 cities in the U.S. for human trafficking. Through our efforts, we hope to educate our members about the complex realities of human trafficking and to work with partner experts to bring holistic gospel healing to victims. Refugee care. Less than 15 minutes from the heart of Atlanta is one of the largest refugee resettlement sites in the United States. And we believe that God has strategically placed Christ's covenant near this community to engage our refugee neighbors with the love of Christ. As Christians, we know that our final home is in the city of God. But as we wait as exiles in the city of man, we're called to seek its welfare through how we neighbor, how we work, and pursue justice for the vulnerable. As we bless the city, our hope is to make way for the renewing power of the gospel.
Yeah, I agree. It's such a helpful video and such a compelling vision, and we want you to be engaged. And so really these few weeks that we have are an invitation into those partnerships, into those efforts. After the service, there's an emphasis table just right through these doors, and you can sign up for opportunities to engage with foster care, with community flourishing, with helping immigrants, just as you saw in the video. And so I do encourage you to take action. There's also just more information in your bulletin. And then next week's also a big week for us. As Thomas mentioned, Abe Cho from City to City is going to be here. And he's going to be preaching actually a different sermon in the morning and in the 5 o'clock. So they'll both be the same worship service, but it will be 2 different sermons. So I encourage you, you can come back to the 5 p.m. And then after the 5 p.m., we will have our tacos and Topo Chico, where we'll have a Q&A with Abe, where Billy and Abe will sit down and talk about just how we as a church can rightly think about engaging with what God is doing in our city. Well, this time, though, we've got an important task ahead of us, to open God's Word and to hear from Him. So Matthew 25, I'm going to read aloud. You can follow along, but I'm going to begin in verse 14, and I'll read through verse 30. Matthew 25, verse 14 through verse 30. Let's hear the word of our Lord together as I read it aloud. For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to his servants his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had received the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug a hole in the ground, and he hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled the accounts with them. And the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing his 5 more talents, saying, Master, you delivered me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little, and I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He who had the 2 talents came forward saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents, and here, I've made you 2 more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little, and now I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He who had received 1 talent came forward saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, have what is yours. But his master answered him, you wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter seed. Well, then you should have at least invested my money with the bankers. Then at my coming, I would have received what was mine with interest. Now, take from this man the talent that I gave him and give it to the one with 10. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is the word of the Lord. Before we get into the text, as we think about justice and mercy, I just want to take a minute to think about this kind of in general. How should we be thinking about this? Yuval Harari wrote a book in 2011 called Sapiens, and he writes it from an atheistic perspective. So he doesn't write it from the perspective that humankind, human beings were made in the image of God. He's writing it from an atheistic perspective, and he's trying to make sense of humanity. And really his question is, how did Homo sapiens, or human beings, dominate all other species? How did we become so dominant in the world? And his basic premise is that we tell stories. The reason that human beings have become so powerful is that we're a storytelling people. And of course, this is true. We do tell stories, and it's from these stories that we deduce meaning and what is just and what is good and what is right. It's these stories that actually give a lot of motivation for what we call valuable, what motivates our lives. I mean, if you think about marketing, this is all marketing is. It's telling a story and trying to invite you into that story, to be a part of the story. Or politicians, politicians, this is what they're doing. I hope you as voters realize this. I hope you realize what they're doing to you as voters. I was thinking about how politicians so often kind of take a cue from the musical, The Music Man. Y'all know this musical? I love this musical. It tells the story of this traveling salesman, Harold Hill, Professor Harold Hill. And he's a salesman, but he's really kind of a con man. And he goes from town to town, and he comes on this very unsuspecting town, River City, Iowa. And he realizes they just got a pool hall there. And so his con begins. And he says, oh man, here in River City, you got trouble. You're going to have trouble. Your young people, they're going to become idle, and they're going to fritter their time away, and they're not going to grow up to be good young people. You got trouble, and that starts with T, and that rhymes with P, and that stands for pool. And he has them believing that because they have this pool room, they're in big, big trouble. And he says the only way out, the only way that the young people of River City, Iowa can be saved is if they would start a band. And it just so happens that Professor Harold Hill sells music instruments. And so they all buy into it. And it's just it's a great kind of story in how we work. We can create these fears and hopes and call people into it. We're storytelling people. So Yuval Harari is right in saying that. And again, it's from these stories that we get a sense of what is right and wrong and unjust. But what's wrong with his hypothesis is if it's just based on stories that we tell, then there is nothing that is objective that exists in the world, right? Everything is subjective. Everything that has value is subjective on whoever's telling that story at that time. It only works, that we can only live in a real world, in a sense, if there is a story behind all of the other stories. Right? We can only live in a world that has objective truth and objective morality and objective justice if there is a story that sets, if you will, all the other stories, that all of the other stories are built upon, that all of the other stories can flow from. And of course, as Christians, we believe that this is the Christian story. This story that God himself, the one who ordered the world, that created the whole world, is telling. The one that he actually entered into. The one that he calls us to be a part of. It's from this story that we understand what is right and what is wrong and what is just, where justice and mercy flow. I was having a conversation with a friend this week about women's rights. And I was explaining to her, I said, the problem that people in the West make is that we believe that there is such a thing called human rights, that just all human beings believe in. I was like, if you believe that, you've never taken seriously any other worldview from any other part of the world. Of course, a lot of other worldviews have different understanding of rights and justice and morality. Of course, in the West, so much of what we love and value, and I would say that we've seen the greatness of things like equality and compassion and freedom. Well, these are Christian ideas, that they flow from a Christian moral superstructure. We have seen them in the Christian story and have seen that they are true and good and beautiful. We've seen their greatness. They flow from the story that is behind all of the other stories, the true story. As Tolkien called it, the true myth. Not that Christianity is mythical and that it's fictional. It's mythical in that it gives understanding. It's a true story that actually gives understanding. It gives understanding to everything else that we see in life. The true story that makes sense of all other stories. You say, well, why are you talking about Yuval Harari and Harold Hill and all of this? Well, I'm talking about all this because we're about to have a conversation about justice. And everybody in the world wants to talk about justice and what is right. But we live in this world that's so divided on our understanding of right and wrong and morality. And I want you to see that flows from different narratives that exist out there. But Christians, of course, are really well equipped to talk about these things because we have the true story. We have the true God who has ordered all of these things, who has truly brought into the world morality and order. And the beauty of that. And of course, what we are saying when we say we want to work for justice in our city is what we want to do is restore the world that we live in to the order that God has designed. I love what Billy said in the video. We want our present city to look like the coming city. We want Atlanta to have tastes and flavors of the New Jerusalem when Jesus reigns, where he has set all things right. This is what it means, thy kingdom to come, and thy will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. So I want to look at Matthew 25. I think it actually has a lot to say to us about this. Matthew 25, we're jumping into the middle of it, but it's told within this broader context. And there's several little vignettes, and they're all kind of doing the same thing. And they're all doing different things within the same thing. But the bigger context is basically Jesus is saying, I'm going away. I'm going to leave you. And I'm going to be gone for a long time. But then I'm going to return. And I want you to remember that I'm coming back. I want you to remember that I'm returning. And in fact, I want you to live in light of my return. I want you to live every day in light of the fact that I, the true king, the true master, I am going to return. And so he prepares them for to live in his absence and to live in light of his coming in a number of different ways. Now, this one is particularly about how they're to steward their lives. As they await the master's return, what do they do with the opportunities that he gives them? So two things that I want to look at in this story. First of all, the master, and then secondly, the servants. So let's look at the master. Now, one of the interesting features, if you've read many parables, one of the interesting features of Jesus' parables, these are little stories that Jesus would tell as teaching tools, is he always kind of works himself into the story. So in most of the parables that Jesus tells, he's one of the characters in the story. You just have to figure out which character is Jesus. So the story of the Good Samaritan, right? You know this story. Jesus is the Good Samaritan. That's the secret. He's the one that showed interest to the person that everyone else forgot about, that everyone else was too busy for, to the downtrodden, to the beat up, to the cast out. In the story of the prodigal son, Jesus, in representing his father and the Godhead's compassion, Jesus is the father that longs to see the broken sinner return home and come back into favor. And he's the father that goes out and pursues the proud older brother. And here, of course, Jesus is the master. Jesus is this master that's going away, and he's entrusting something to his servants. Of course, the story is told with what he's entrusting is talents. Now the talent, this is to be understood. Some people kind of think about this as abilities. That's not what it is. It's a money unit. A talent was like a weight unit. And we don't exactly know what it was. It would have likely either been a talent of silver or a talent of gold. And the talent of gold would have been much larger sums. But a talent of silver was equal to about 1 year's worth of wages. So this is a big amount of money that the master is entrusting to his servants here. If you make $50,000 a year, just to use that as an example, one servant got $50,000, one servant got $100,000, one servant got $250,000. I mean, there's a lot of money to receive, to be entrusted with all at once. And of course, that's assuming that it was a silver talent. It could have been a gold talent. It could have been much more. But the master goes away, and he gives this great sense of entrustment to his servants. Look at verse 14. It says, it'll be like a man going on a journey who called his servants, and he entrusted them with his property. To one he gave 5, the other 2, the other 1, each according to his ability. And then he went away. So a couple observations from this verse that I think are important for us to think about. First, again, remember, Jesus is writing himself into the story here. What Jesus is saying to his disciples and what he's saying to us is that he is entrusting something to us. He is entrusting a great responsibility to us. Jesus is our master, and he has given us this enormous responsibility. He's entrusted his property to us. You could say it this way. He's entrusted part of his kingdom to us. He's entrusted his ministry to us. This is what the Christian is to feel. The work and the ministry that Jesus did during his time on earth, we are to continue until he returns. Jesus has entrusted this work to you. If you're a Christian, I hope you feel a sense of that. Jesus says, I have entrusted this work to you to go and make disciples, to expand my kingdom, to bring restoration, to do the very things that I do, just like the master said. Basically the master is saying, I want you to invest and use this wealth in the same way that I would if I were here. We often say that. The Christian life is this. It's living your life as Jesus would live it if he were you. How would Jesus live your life? And if you live your life as Jesus would live your life, then guess what? His kingdom will go forward. His property, if you will increase. His kingdom will increase. That's what's happening in the text. The master, Jesus is saying, I'm entrusting my ministry to you. And it's an incredible responsibility, but it's also an incredible privilege. I mean, if you just think about that as a Christian, what does it mean that Jesus, God himself, has entrusted this most precious ministry of his saving work, of his disciple making, of his kingdom coming to earth? What does it mean that he's entrusted that to you and to me? Jesus has entrusted us this amazing responsibility. But the second thing, and actually I think this is incredibly liberating, but it's not a way that we typically talk. He gives different responsibilities. He gives 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 5, and it says according to his ability. Now that's actually kind of liberating. I know we don't like to talk, we don't like to say that some people have greater abilities than others. We like to be fair, but some people have greater abilities than others. Some people have greater burdens than others, greater responsibilities, and that's incredibly liberating. I mean, for me as a pastor, if I always had to live up to Charles Spurgeon or something like that, I'd feel like a total idiot. I don't have the abilities that he has. But the call is never It doesn't say, the end of the call, it doesn't say, well done, able, or good and able servant, or good and talented servant, or good and genius servant. You know what it says? It says, well done, good and faithful servant. It's the call to be faithful with the things that God has entrusted to you. That's actually incredibly liberating. We have different abilities. God's given us different things to steward. We don't all have the same amount of wealth. We don't all have the same amount of genius. We don't have the same amount of, even opportunities in life, and that's okay. That's actually not where the reward comes from. It's very different than the world. The world says talent, wealth, success. This is what it means to be great. In the kingdom of God, it's faithfulness. Will you be faithful with what God has entrusted to you? And then the third little observation is and this is the most important thing. It's all the master's wealth. The master doesn't ever give the talents to these servants for it to become theirs, right? I think a lot of people misread this story. The money never is given, in a sense, for the wealth to become the servant's own property. It's always, even when he's away, it's always the master's property. He doesn't give it to them, he entrusts it to them. He says, will you be faithful with what I'm entrusting to you? Will you work so that the master will be profited? And what's amazing is if they do, as they trust the master, what is the invitation at the end? Well done, good and faithful servant. It says, enter into my joy. In other words, what he's saying to them is, if you'll just trust me, actually, I'm going to share everything that I have with you. It'll all be yours. Enter into my joy. Shares all that he has with them. There's this song that we're actually going to sing it later in our sermon or service. It says, the name of the song is Yet Not I, But Through Christ in Me. And one of the lines, I love this line, it says, to this I hold, my only hope is Jesus, for my life, and I just love this little phrase, is wholly bound to his. My life is wholly bound to his. Everything I am, it's bound to him. He is my master, right? That's a great question. Is your life wholly bound to Jesus? Is he your only hope? You don't have a second bet. You don't have a side bet going on somewhere. No, my life is wholly bound to his. As the song says, he is my joy. He is my righteousness. He is my freedom, my steadfast love, my deep and boundless peace. What it means to be a Christian is saying, I'm no longer the master of my life. I'm completely loyal. I'm completely dependent on Jesus. My life is wholly bound to his. As we just sang, we just sang this one, I will not boast in anything, right? No gifts, no power, no wisdom, but I will boast in Jesus. And the amazing invitation of that is as we understand this, what it means to be wholly bound to Jesus, totally wrapped up in him, to let go of the reins of our lives, as we, in a sense, entrust all of ourselves to Jesus, he entrusts all of himself to us. Like the song goes on to say, so how strange and divine, I can sing all is mine. It's not mine, not through me, but through Christ in me. Here's a great question. Do you have a master, or are you the master? Do you have a master? Is your life wholly bound to Jesus? Or are you saying, well, maybe, are you saying, well, Jesus may entrust me my life and whatever I have? Or are you saying, well, maybe I could entrust him some parts of my life? Are you the master? Maybe entrusting Jesus different parts of your life here or there. Yeah, you can have my Sunday mornings. You can, have this or that in my life. Are you the master, entrusting part of your life to Jesus? Or is Jesus the master who entrusts everything to you? Do you have a master, or are you the master? The second thing, though, I want to look at, though, is the servants. The first and the second servant, they do what they're supposed to do. They love their master. I mean, this is the point. They love their master. And so you know what they do? They do what the master would do. And they go invest his money. And they take risks and they invest his money and they double it up. They work hard. They do the kind of thing that the master would do and they make money for the master. And of course, they receive this great praise. Well done. But the third servant, it's a fascinating exchange. Look at it with me. This is verse 24. I got it up on the screen here. It says, he who would receive the 1 talent came forward saying, and this is interesting. Notice what he does here. Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid. And I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, have what is yours. You know what's interesting about that? He doesn't take any ownership of this, does he? The master entrusted him this talent. He said, look, I'm giving you this responsibility. I want you to do with it as what I did. Then what does this servant do? Rather than saying, you know what, I'm sorry, I messed up. He immediately goes blaming the master. Like, master, you're too hard. You're a hard man. You reap where you didn't sow. It's your fault, master. You're too mean. You expect too much. And so I denied you. But of course, what he really did is he just didn't care about the master. He only cared about himself. Why am I going to do all this extra work for the master? He's away. Why am I going to be so concerned about his money? He didn't even entrust me most of his money. He gave that guy 5 talents. I'm just going to forget about this. And he doesn't take the responsibility that the master had given him seriously. Now the master answers him, and it's a strong indictment. He doesn't say, well, thank you for not losing it. What does the master say? You're wicked and lazy. You wicked and slothful servant. You're my servant. I entrusted you with this great responsibility and you buried it. You did nothing with it. It's as if the master is saying to you, do you hate me? Now the next part, I don't think the master is agreeing with the servant here. I don't think he's saying, yes, I sow where I have not gathered. I think he's kind of being sarcastic. And I think that the question mark here from the translators is helpful. He's basically saying like, oh, so you knew that I reap where I have not sown? Oh, so you knew that I gathered where I had scattered no seed? You knew that I was such a bad guy? You knew that I was so horrible? And then he calls his bluff. He says, well, then why didn't you put it in the bank? If I'm such a bad guy, then take the money to the bankers. Let somebody else do this. Then I'd at least have gotten it back with interest. But no, he knows that the man was just being lazy. He said, take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. He has not taken the responsibility of being in the master's house seriously, and so give those responsibilities to one who will. And he says, to everyone who has, more will be given. He has an abundance. But the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And then the judgment. Cast this worthless servant into the outer darkness, into the place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's a very harsh text. It's very stark, too. Have you thought about this? On one side, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master. On the other side, outer darkness, weeping, gnashing of teeth. This is hell. This is separation from the master. It's very stark. So what can we learn from these servants? And here it is. You can either take what the master has entrusted to you and orient your life toward the master, or you can take what the master has entrusted to you and orient your life toward yourselves. You can take what the master has entrusted you and be wholly bound to him. Orient your whole life toward the master, or you can be the master and be oriented towards yourselves. But if you're oriented to yourself, and I want you to hear this, you'll be just like this guy. You'll be just like this guy. You'll always be hedging. You'll always be protecting. You'll never take risks. You'll never really be free because you're in control, right? This is the third servant. He's in control. And so he does the safest possible route. He doesn't really do anything for the master. He takes the lazy and safe way. But if you realize that it's all the master's, that everything you really have has been entrusted to you by God, it'll change your whole life. You'll be able to live into him. You'll be so free. And I want you to hear this. This applies to all things of your life, right? So the interpretation of this is not just churchy things here, right? I'm not just saying, man, if God's giving you the responsibility to hand out the bulletins, you better hand out 10, Even though that may be part of it. But this is not just churchy things. This is your whole life I'm talking about. This is everything about you. It's been entrusted to you by the master. What are you going to do with every opportunity that you have? Every opportunity that you have. Are you self-oriented or are you master-oriented? If you're master-oriented, it'll totally change the way you have relationships with people. It'll change the relationship you have with other Christian friends. You'll be serious about stirring one another along in the faith, about praying for one another. It'll change the way you have relationships with non-Christian friends. You'll realize, man, I'm an ambassador for the Lord to these folks. I'm representing Jesus to these folks. That's an enormous responsibility. It'll change the way you parent. All of a sudden, that the most important thing in your parenting will be how you bring your child up in the ways of the Lord, how you show them the Lord. Discipleship will all of a sudden, because you're master-oriented, it's all about the master. It'll change everything about you. It'll change the way you spend your money. It'll change the way you work. You won't make decisions that are strictly just for profit. Now, profit is, of course, a part of work, but you'll make decisions that make no sense to the world around you. You'll be generous with your time. You'll be helpful to people in your workplace. You'll do things because they're the right thing to do. You'll work for the Lord. And you'll work hard, even when no one sees, because you're working for the Lord. Don't you see? That's a great question for us to think about. Which servant are you? What are you doing with what God has entrusted to you? Are you only concerned about your own things and you said, whatever God's entrusted to me, I don't have time for that, and you've buried it in the ground? Or have you said, man, God has entrusted me this life, all of these opportunities, this wealth, this job, these relationships. I'm going to do whatever I can to leverage it toward him so that his kingdom grows through me. What is your relationship with the master? And I want us to think about this as it relates to justice and mercy and what God is doing in our church in this city. One of the things I want to talk about this more in a couple weeks. I want us as a church to have what I'm calling a multi-directional approach to bringing about justice, to bringing about morality, to bringing about goodness in our city. And so part of that work is, I'll say, from the bottom up, if you will. It's small acts. It's grassroots. It's you giving of your time to go and serve in Clarkston in a refugee area. But part of that is, if you will, from the top down. It's systematic. It's how do we as a church think shrewdly about actually changing the broader kind of cultural influences of the culture that we've live in. It's multi-directional. This is the ministry of Jesus. Part of the ministry of Jesus, he takes care of this person who's has leprosy, who nobody in society cares about, and that brings about incredible healing and power in the society that he lives in. And then sometimes he goes after Nicodemus, this high-ranking official, and that brings about change. How do we think about what God is doing through our life to impact this city? It's got to be a multi-directional approach. I love 2x2 grids. And this one is at best in beta stage. I didn't even draw the horizontal line here. But I think it's actually helpful for us to think about. So on the horizontal axis of the 2x2 grid, the Bible clearly calls us to be compassionate. And we're going to talk about this more in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks is the Matthew 25 text where Jesus talks about identifying with the least of these. I was sick, I was in prison, and you did not visit me. Every time you did one for the least of these, you did it for me. So clearly the Bible talks to us about being compassionate, to noticing those opportunities the Lord brings our way. And I just want to tell you, it's very easy. It's so easy in a city like Atlanta to squander those opportunities, to bury those opportunities, because you're so busy and you're doing so many important things. It's very easy to be unconcerned. I'll just put this down here. It's easy to be unconcerned. I think of the story of the Good Samaritan, right? And remember the story, the guy is beat up, he's left for dead on the side of the road, and the Levite goes by, and the priest goes by. I don't know that we're supposed to assume that the Levite and the priest are bad guys, but they were so busy doing whatever they were doing that were probably good things that they missed this opportunity to serve this broken person right in front of their path. But at the same time, I believe that we're called as Christians to both be compassionate, to be working our way up this axis, but to also be, this says, wisely diligent, if you can't read my writing. To be wisely diligent, to work hard, to take the opportunities that we have, and to work hard in them, and to be shrewd, and to be smart. I think so often Christians can have this passive kind of mentality. We can almost, and I want you to hear this, we can almost hide behind the sovereignty of God toward a kind of passive disobedience and say, well, God is sovereign. Of course, God is sovereign. But we can use that in the same way the third servant did and say, God, I knew you to be sovereign, and so I did nothing. I was lazy and passive. No, God's called us to be wise and diligent and hardworking and shrewd in the way that we go about obeying him, bringing about his kingdom. I'll give you an example that kind of puts all this together. Read Together ATL. I love this ministry. Basically, it's a ministry where members of our church and other churches, it's not just Christ Covenant, go and they give 1 hour of their week. They give 1 hour of their week and they sit down with 2 kids that are in 2nd grade and they go over sight words with them. And we've seen amazing results from this. 1 hour a week, you sit down with these 2 2nd graders and you go over their sight words, and those kids who are in Title I schools who likely would not learn how to read are learning how to read. And because they're learning how to read, they're getting an education, and because they're getting an education, their chances at potentially flourishing in life are enormously expanded. It's a simple little way. If we talk about the multi-directional, we need this. We need people that are willing to say, hey, I'll give you an hour. I'll give these 2 children an hour. We need a bunch of that. We need a ton of people at the grassroots level working toward compassion and justice in our city. But what we also need, we also need to be thinking about, if we really want to see this happen, is we need some of you guys to get on the school board. We need some people being principals of schools. We need people that are in a systematic way impacting what's happening in our city too. That's the multi-directional approach. Filled with compassion, yes, but also filled with this wise diligence and how we go about what we're doing. But here's the key, and this is the key to all of this. Are you master-oriented, or are you just self-oriented? If you're self-oriented, then you won't go volunteer with Read Together ATL because you say, well, my time is my time. I got more important things to do. Somebody else can do that. I'm an important person. I need to be doing this. You'll just be so consumed with yourself. But if you're master-oriented, you say, well, why has God given me this time? What am I supposed to do with my time? What is most pleasing to God? If you're self-oriented and you have a great business that you're leading, you'll say, well, I'm building a great business. I don't need to be doing all this. But if you're master-oriented, you'll say, you know what, maybe actually I've got this great business and I can hire refugees and give them a chance to begin building their life here. I can be intentional about who I hire and actually give people jobs that need them desperately, and I can be strategic about that. It's a multi-directional approach. But what the real difference is are you master-oriented or are you just self-oriented? Do you realize that that business that you have and the time that you have and the friendships that you have and the relationship you have, it all comes from the master. And it's all for him. Are you wholly bound to Jesus? Are you the master, or do you have a master? You know, C.S. Lewis, he said this. He said, we must picture hell as a state where everyone is perpetually concerned about his own dignity and advancement. We must picture hell as a state where everyone is perpetually concerned about his own dignity and advancement, where everyone has a grievance, right? Everybody's been offended, where everyone lives with the deadly serious passions of envy, self-importance, and resentment. Have you been freed by the master? Or are you still trying to be sovereign over your own little kingdom, disconcerted with what the master is doing? And the story is so stark. The joy of your master, weeping and gnashing of teeth. You know, we all resist masters. I'll go ahead and tell you, we do. We all resist masters because we all think we can do a better job. We all think we've got it together. We all trust ourselves. We all desire our own glory. So we resist masters. And we all try to be governors, so self-reliant of our own little tiny skull-sized kingdoms. My hope for you today, right now, and I want to look at you in the face, my hope for you is that you'd be freed from that. That you'd actually see how needy you are, how much of a sinner you are before a holy God, how needy you are of a new master that's not you. And that as you come to that place, you would start to see how good this master is. I know why you're resistant of masters, because you've probably been around a bunch of bad ones. But Jesus, he's so different. He's the master that actually became the servant. He's the master who was in all comfort and all joy. He was in his Father's throne room. And yet he left all of that to come and serve us. Most people, they'll be the servant for a while, right? They'll read the book on servant leadership so they can one day be the master and be really comfortable. Jesus was the master, and he became the servant, the most profound servant. Don't you see, Jesus was the one who was put out. He identified with us in our worst. He took on all of our sin. Don't you see, Jesus went to the cross on our behalf. He was put in the place of outer darkness. He was sent to the place where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Why? To save lazy and worthless servants like us. And so that he can say to servants like us who have not been about the work of our master, who have squandered what our master has entrusted to us, so he can say to us, come into my Father's joy. Share in my Father's joy through faith in me. If you see that, if you realize that, if you get that, it'll change everything about you. You'll live away from yourself and you'll live toward him. You'll live toward his joy. It'll change the way that you spend your money, your time, your energy, your relationships. It'll change everything about you. You will go from being self-oriented to master-oriented. And that, friends, that is how the kingdom of God will grow in our city. Let's pray together. Father, give us eyes to see, ears to hear. Give us hearts to believe these things. Open our minds and hearts now, Lord. Help us to see how needy we are of you, the true master, the one who became a servant on our behalf, the one who loves us in this profound and deep way, Lord, that
that you, the master, would be willing to identify with the broken servant, put out into the place of darkness, of weeping, of gnashing of teeth, so that through Jesus, rebellious servants like us may be welcomed in and have hope, find forgiveness and new life. Help us to believe these things today, Lord, and to live into you. Do this work in our hearts, I pray now. In Jesus' name, amen.